So Paramount Plus has its new Pet Cemetery movie coming out October 6th, Bloodlines. So I thought it'd be fun to talk about the Pet Cemetery movies, and that includes the original one from the 80s, the sequel to that one, Pet Cemetery 2. I bet a lot of you didn't know that one existed. I didn't until recently. And then the remake that came out a couple years ago. So I guess we'll start with this first one. I'm not a big fan of this movie, honestly. So I watched this for the first time for this video. I've read Stephen King's novel. It's a fantastic novel if you've never read the book. It's great. But this movie on the other hand, not so much. I wasn't a big fan of it. I think the reason why, I will say the 4K looked great. The picture quality was great. I have a couple problems with this movie. So this movie is kind of like a horror movie in the same way The Exorcist is a horror movie, where it's about a family and the family drama and that they're dealing with. And that's not a bad concept, right? Because a lot of the story deals with death and, like, this animal coming back from the dead, and it does involve children, things like that in the book and stuff. So I don't mind any of that, but it's just, I don't really care about this family. The kid isn't as big of a focus as in most horror movies at this time would usually make them. It's just very slowly paced. It's a very slow movie that there aren't a lot of actual horror elements in this movie the last 20, 40 minutes, other than, like, man, I would say, nah, that's not true. There's some horror elements kind of all throughout, but they're so slow and minimal that they kind of fade from my memory a little bit. This movie's just really, really slow, and not that slow movies are necessarily a bad thing, but the pace to this one is ridiculously slow. It feels like nothing's happening, and then when scary things start happening, they're just not that scary or worth the wait enough to get there. And then also, if you read Stephen King's novel, it's nothing like this movie, where in the book, I'm not gonna go too into comparisons between the book, but I think it is frustrating when you miss the entire point of the thing you're adapting, right? I don't usually like to compare movies to books, but this is one case where I'm okay with it because I missed the entire goddamn point. In the book, the story has all these complicated rules and mythology and how the Pet Cemetery works and how things and people come back and how all this stuff works, and they don't really dive into that. Actually, the remake, from what I remember when I saw it last, has more of that in the story. And Pet Cemetery is one of those stories that I really don't think they should make a movie out of. Really should be a mini-series, kind of a la something like The Stand or the original It with Tim Curry was a mini-series. Because a lot of that kind of stuff put into it makes it stronger of being a mini-series. And yeah, it's not a super long book, but it is a book that does feel like enough of it could be expanded upon in a series more so than a movie. But this movie is just, my biggest issue with this movie is it was just boring. It's one of those movies that I also watch it, and I didn't grow up in the 80s and see this movie in the 80s. And I don't really understand why anyone was really ever scared by this movie, because it's just not scary at all. It's just boring. I know some people really love this movie, and it's going to be blasphemy what I'm saying here, but sorry, I wasn't that big of a fan. I may try to watch it a couple years later. Maybe I'll appreciate it or like it more, but I don't think so. I wasn't a big fan, but I'm curious how Pet Cemetery 2 will turn out, so we'll talk about that next week.